ஆயிடுச்சு. எது சாமி எடுத்துக்கிட்டாரு. Hello. Can you hear me? கேக்குது. நீங்க பேசுங்கம்மா. அப்புறம் எனக்கு இங்க கேட்க முடியுங்க.
ஹலோ.
ஓகே பேசுங்க கண்டிப்பா பேசுங்க. ஹலோ.
கேக்குது சார்.
பேசுங்கம்மா. நீங்க பேசுறதா எங்களுக்கு ரிசீவ் ஆகுதுன்னு தெரியணும்.
ஓகே சார்.
நல்லா இருக்குன்னு சொல்லு, சீக்கிரம் வந்து சார் சொல்லு.
ஓகே வாங்க.
ஓகே சார்.
இன்னும் ஆரம்பிக்கலையா? You are already in. என்ன கவி? கவி.
என்னம்மா?
languages, for example.
Good morning, Professor. Good morning, Professor Sankaran. Good morning, Professor Sankaran. Good morning, Professor Sankaran, sir.
Dr. Selvam, can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes, Dr. Selvam.
Good morning, sir.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah. I'm able to hear you.
Okay, so I'm trying to share my screen.
Yeah. Now we are able to see you.
Yeah, are you able to see my screen?
No.
Can you able to see your face? Not PPT.
Beautiful face is appearing. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, please you send to my mail, sir. Sankaran, sir.
Yes, are you able to see? Because I'm not able to share the screen. Once I.
Please you send to my mail.
Okay, I'll send you the screen. Okay.
You start after 5 minutes or 10 minutes, no issue. Please send to my mail.
Okay. Dr. Selvam?
Are you able to see, sir?
Yes.
No issue. Shall we start?
Yes, 1 second. Dr. Selvam, can you hear me?
Yeah. Able to hear you.
Yes. Hello?
Yes.
Yes, I'm getting a lot of my echo.
Yep. Mobile. So some problem with you only, sir.
Okay, can see whatever I'm saying, I'm hearing back. So Dr. Selvam, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Dr. Selvam, can you hear me?
Sir,
Hello?
ரெண்டு லாகின் பண்ணிருக்கீங்க. ஒன்னு வெளியில வந்துருங்க.
Can you hear me?
Wait. Sir, please. Hello.
Dr. Selvam, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Selvam, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes. Please go. Unmute
Hello?
your mic. Unmute your speaker, sir. Mic. Hello?
Hello? Dr. Selvam, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
நம்ம சொல்றது கேட்கல அவருக்கு.
நம்ம சொல்றது அவருக்கு கேட்கல. சார் நீங்க பேசுங்க.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm hearing a lot of background. Are you able to hear me properly?
Here it is clear, sir. Here everything is clear.
Okay, for some reason I'm getting a lot of background noise. So let me.
என்ன செய்யணும்னு தெரியாது.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. No problem.
Hello?
ஸ்பீக்கர் குறைச்சு வச்சுருக்காரு வால்யூம். அவரு பக்கம் ஸ்பீக்கர் வால்யூம் குறைஞ்சிருக்கு. நல்லா மிஸ்டேக் பண்ணுங்க. நம்ம ஸ்பீக்கர் வால்யூம் குறைச்சு வச்சு
Okay, நான் பேசுறது கேக்குறதா பாருங்க. Okay.
நான் பிரேயர் சாங் பண்ணுறேன். நீங்க பிரசன்ட் பண்ண ஆரம்பிச்சுங்க.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. சொல்லிட்டு போன் தராரு. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to this third plenary session of the 17th International Seminar, Dynamics of Emerging Business Innovation and Trends, Academic Industry Load, Debit Air 2022. Now, we invite our melodic makers to sing Tamil Thai Waltzes. Let us all stand for Tamil Thai Waltzes.
நீராறும் கடலுளித்த நிலமடந்து கெழிலொழுகும் சீராறும் வதனமென திகழ் பரத கண்டமிகு நெக்கணமும் மது சிறந்த திராவிடனர் திருநாடும் தக்க சிறு பிரிநுதலும் தரித்தனரும் திலகமுமே அத்திலக வாசனை போல் அனைத்துலகும் இன்பமுற எத்திசையும் புகழ் மணக்க இருத்த பெரும் தமிழனங்கே தமிழனங்கே உன் சீரிழமை திரும்பி அந்த செயல் மறந்து வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே.
அது எதுக்கும் ஆஃப் பண்ணி கொடுக்குறீங்க? ஆஃப் பண்ணி.
Thank you, friends. True wisdom lies in welcoming the precious things out of each day as it goes by. Now we request A. Sherwin of second MBA to welcome the special guest of this meeting. Happy morning, honored all gathered here. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome all for this second day of international webinar and for the third plenary session. First of all, I would like to welcome our head of the department, Dr.M.Selvam, Head, Department of Commerce and Financial Studies, for this webinar. Thank you, sir, for arranging this wonderful session. Knowledge is the only treasure which will increase when you share it with others. That knowledge would double when it is shared by great resource persons like Dr. Shankar and Venkateshwar. Next, I would like to welcome the resource person, Dr. Shankar and Venkateshwar, St. Mary's College, California, USA, who took meticulous effort to join with us for this international webinar. His lecture on managing impact of COVID-19 on India's supply chain is the most awaited session. We are eagerly waiting to hear your lecture and we extend a hearty welcome to you, sir, for this event. Next, I am very happy to welcome Professor S. Ayavillai, former Senior Professor of Economics, Bharathasan University, for this plenary session. His valuable point about the recent trends helps us to learn a lot. We welcome you, sir. The webinar is meant for the participants. It is appreciable that the participants join through Google Meet and YouTube platform for gaining knowledge. Dear participants, a warm welcome to all of you. Next, I would like to welcome our department faculty members, Dr. S. Vanitha, Dr. J. Gayatri, and guest faculty members, Dr. K. Rajalakshmi and Dr. C. Kadiravan, for this plenary session. Last but not least, I extend my warm welcome to our department PhD research scholars, my classmates and my dear juniors for this second day of webinar. Once again, with immense pleasure, I welcome you all.
The capacity to learn is a gift. The ability to learn is a skill. The willingness to learn is a choice. Now, we invite Dr. Shankar Venkateshwar, St. Mary's College of California, USA, to give a lecture on managing the impact of COVID-19 on Indian supply chain.
Good morning, friends. Before inviting Professor Shankar Venkateshwar, it is my duty to submit the brief report about yesterday's proceedings. Dear friends, yesterday is 17th International Seminar was inaugurated by our Honorable Vice Chancellor along with the release of the 18th year issue of Smart Channel and the 13th Smart Channel Annual Award. So the program went on well. So morning by 10 o'clock, our Vice Chancellor conferred the award to 5 experts, which was followed by inauguration of the seminar as well as the release of the journals. Then, in the same inaugural function, Professor Jafar Bayman from Malaysia delivered the keynote address on a very important topic, future business growth through technology and innovation, collaborative efforts between the academia and industry in value creation, so which was also well received by all the participants. Then with the tea break, then the another speaker, Professor Javamalai Vinnarachi, principal advisor to the director of UNIDO, has delivered a topic on entrepreneurial aspirations and the innovation system, which was also very much received by all the participants. Then after lunch break, the another important plenary session 2 was delivered by Dr. Abdul Qadir bin Portman from Malaysia on a very important topic, ensuring customer retention for business survival in the new competitive world. So this lecture was also very much received by appreciated by the participants. Then after the tea break in the afternoon, between 3:30 p.m. to 5 p.m., 2 parallel sessions were conducted for paper presenters. So all the paper presenters were given sufficient time to present their papers, and around 50 papers were discussed yesterday, and the remaining 50 papers will be taken up today. Now, in the second day, Professor Shankar Venkateshwar is going to give a very important topic on managing the impact of COVID-19 on Indian supply chain. So Professor Shankar Venkateshwar is a very good friend of mine, and he has visited more than 10 times to our department. And today also, he booked a ticket to come down to Trichy, but due to these government restrictions, so he cancelled and he is at Chennai and he is going to deliver a topic. And I on my own behalf and on behalf of all of us, my sincere appreciation to Professor Shankar Venkateshwar as well as personal welcome to Professor Shankar Venkateshwar. So over to Professor Shankar Venkateshwar sir.
Sir, you can.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Sankaran Venkateshwar, and I will be making my presentation on the impact of COVID-19 on India's supply chains. First, I want to thank Dr.M.Selvam for once again kindly inviting me to make a presentation for your International Accounting Conference. It is always my pleasure to make this presentation at Bharathidasan University. And I always look forward to making a personal visit to Bharathidasan University every year. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, the last 2 years I've not been able to personally come and visit Bharathidasan University. So in today's presentation, I would like to talk about how COVID-19, which unfortunately we still have almost 3 years in a row, it has been impacting the lives of people, and it also been impacting the economy for a very long period of time. And it seems that we have yet another wave of COVID-19 because of the new Omicron variant of COVID-19. So what I'm going to try to do today is this. COVID-19 has impacted the lives of people and economies in so many different ways. One thing that we have seen in the last 2 or 3 years is that COVID-19 has impacted the supply chain for many industries. So basically what that means is because of COVID-19, we have disruption in the ways in which companies supply their raw material to manufacture products. So there has been a lot of disruption because over the last so many years, a lot of these supplies have been concentrated in certain parts of the world. And because of COVID-19, because of lockdown in certain economies, those countries, those places are not able to supply raw material to companies. And because of that, there's a lot of shortage, there's a lot of disruption, and it has impacted the companies, the availability of products and so forth for customers. So let's get started on what I want to talk about. So in today's session, I'm going to particularly focus on the supply chain disruption for Indian companies, and I will focus in about 5 or 6 industries in India and how they are managing to get around the supply chain disruption in those industries. So let's get started with some basic introduction. Over the last few decades or so, firms have optimized their value chains through offshoring and consolidating their manufacturing bases in low-cost economies. Now, before COVID-19, this is what companies did, and this is what companies in India also did. We looked at the globe and we tried to identify countries where the cost of production was low. So for manufacturing, China was basically the factory for the entire world because the cost of manufacturing products was very, very inexpensive in China. Okay? So that worked well when there was no COVID-19, when there was no supply chain disruption. But things dramatically changed over the last 1 or 2 years because of supply chain disruption. And COVID, and China, as you know, has a zero COVID policy. They do not tolerate COVID-19 at all. They just completely shut down cities. As you know, now there are 2 major cities in China with almost 23 million people. Their cities have been completely shut down because they found maybe 5 or 10 COVID cases. And that has enormous impact on other countries across the globe because they are dependent on China for raw materials and for a lot of other products. And because of that, there has been a lot of disruption in supply chain, and that has led to a shortage and increase in prices. Now, in the US and including India, there has been a dramatic increase in the prices of various products and services because of supply chain disruption. The US has the highest inflation rate in the last 69 years or so. Until now, the United States had only about 2% inflation rate. Now, the inflation rate is in double digits because of supply chain disruption. Okay? So that is so. So what has worked well until now no longer works because of COVID-19 until we have some diversification in supply chain across different countries and across different economies. So here we say, however, with the prolonging of the pandemic, both regional and global value chains stand fractured, and there is a pressing need to reevaluate and re-engineer the globally integrated supply chains. As companies look to diversify their supply chain risk, India has an exclusive opportunity to emerge as the preferred destination for global companies. Until now, for good or bad, most economies were dependent on China. And now the pandemic has allowed countries like India to diversify the global chain. Why should it be China? Why cannot the global factory be in India? Why cannot we make in India? So the COVID has presented an opportunity for companies in India to try to become part of the global supply chain instead of allowing China to become the monopoly in providing products and services to different economies in the world. So what are some of the issues that has resulted as of COVID-19? First of all, it is weak demand. The demand for products and services has weakened across most of the industries due to weak consumer sentiment, job losses, and as consumers defer their non-discretionary purchases and focus on buying essential items. So people are trying to survive, right? So they're focusing on absolute items that they need to survive on their day-to-day life. The restrictions imposed to curb the spread of virus has affected the ongoing infrastructure and other projects, thereby leading to a cascading effect on the value chain of related industries. Travel restrictions have severely impacted transport, tourism, hospitality, and aviation sectors. So these sectors have been dramatically impacted because of COVID-19. There have also been supply chain disruptions. The curb on the movement of people and non-essential goods have affected the supply chain, leading to shortage of raw materials. The coronavirus outbreak in major raw material supplying countries has affected the movement of raw material across the borders. The industries such as automotive and pharmaceuticals are feeling the heat of supply chain disruptions due to their dependency on a single source for most of their requirements, and that single source being China. The supply chain disruptions have led to longer product cycle and increased financial liabilities. As you all know, Tamil Nadu just imposed again some partial lockdown just 2 days ago, right? And that has impacted, once again, it has impacted the economy in India and in the US. As you know, we have the largest number of COVID cases since the pandemic started, right? So we have almost 500,000 or COVID cases, or 5 lakh COVID cases per day in the US. So the COVID cases have dramatically increased in the US, although the new Omicron variant is less lethal than the Delta variant or the previous variant. It has still impacted the economy in the US, and we are hoping that we can bring that under control in a very short period of time. Liquidity crunch. Businesses are under pressure to meet their existing fixed overhead costs, such as rental for their offices and factories, electricity bill, wages, as the revenue has been hit hard due to weak demand amid pandemic-related challenges. It has become extremely difficult for businesses, especially medium and small-scale enterprises, to meet their existing loan obligations, and this can force some of them toward bankruptcy. A lot of companies, particularly in the service industry, have gone bankrupt because of the pandemic over the last 2 or 3 years. So companies are trying to reinvent themselves, and companies that were doing things the old way, many of them do not exist anymore because of the pandemic. Many of the service businesses, particularly in the hospitality sector, aviation sector, consumer sector, have gone bankrupt as a result of the pandemic. Very low labor and capacity underutilization. The exodus of unemployed migrant laborers to their native places has further added to the ongoing problems in industries. A lot of the migrant workers, as you know, when the pandemic hit 2 years ago, they were all forced to go back to North India, right? Because there was no jobs because of lockdown. The worry remains whether they will return to work soon, given the recent traumatic experience of job losses and travel hardships. The existing workforce is also facing difficulties in reaching factories due to curbs on the movement of people within the state, thereby affecting the overall productivity of these organizations. The shortage of manpower and shorter duration of work hours have affected the capacity utilization of industries, and there is no clear sign when normalcy will return due to the ongoing uncertainty about finding a cure for the pandemic. So as you know, over the last 3 years, suddenly we have a jump in cases and things get locked down, economy comes to a standstill, and when cases go down, we reopen the economy. So the COVID cases have still not gone away, and we don't know when it's going to go away, right? We thought that everything was fine until the Omicron virus hit, and now again everybody is going into a lockdown mode, and we see that experience in Tamil Nadu as well since January 6th. Meeting regulatory requirements. Industries are facing the challenges of meeting various regulatory requirements such as license extension, payment of license fees for operating businesses due to manpower shortage and liquidity crunch. The filing of GST returns also remains challenging because of the pandemic. Workforce health and business in new normal. So whatever we used to do 3 years ago is no longer the case now. We have to adjust ourselves because of the pandemic. A lot of companies have changed the ways in which they do their business because of pandemic. Maintaining the health of workers is in new normal also remains a challenging task for industries in the absence of proper guidelines. This is further expected to add to the liquidity crunch, and without any support from the government, it'll be very difficult for several companies to survive going forward. So these are some of the issues that we are facing because of the pandemic, and these issues are still ongoing because the pandemic is still with us. So what we see here is a summary of the various disruptions that have been caused by the pandemic. Okay? So some of the disruptions are demand related, some of them are supply related. So let's look at some of the disruptions that were caused by the pandemic. So first one is demand side impact. So this is where, because of the pandemic, the demand for products and services have been impacted by COVID-19. So I have highlighted some of the most important impact on the demand side. First of all, we have travel restrictions. People are restricted in terms of traveling. Even now, I come to the US every 6 months or so. We still have a bubble. The Indian government has not opened up travel from other countries. Only Indians with either you have to be an Indian citizen or you have to have an overseas citizen of India card in order to come to the US. And this is 3 years in a row. So 2 years ago, I had to get an OCI card in order for me to be able to visit India. So which means that travel is still impacted. Indian government was planning to open up international travel by December 31st. Now, because of the Omicron, they have postponed it indefinitely. So even now, people are not allowed to move freely into and out of India. Branded hotels and tour operators are cumulatively expected to incur 1.6 trillion in losses because of the pandemic. Closing of theaters, closing of shopping complexes, right? So they close it up, things get bad, they open it back up again they close it up. As you know, we have 100% lockdown on Sundays, which would be tomorrow. So these things are still unresolved. We're still going through back and forth in terms of opening and closing a lot of these service-oriented industries. Drop in disposable income because people are uncertain, a lot of jobs have been lost, and people are very concerned, and they're conserving, and they are tightening their belt. They are not openly spending the money. Steep drop in consumer confidence. So people are very, very worried and anxious because of COVID, because of a lot of uncertainty associated with COVID. On the supply side, disruptions due to supply chain breakdowns emanating from China, South Korea, Italy, Spain, France, Germany, the UK, and the USA. So certain companies, certain countries are focused on efficiency in certain areas. And because of the COVID, there has been massive supply chain disruptions. Because if you're, depending upon raw materials from China, because of the lockdown in China, you're not able to get the raw material from China. If you're depending upon something from Germany, if you're depending upon something from the US, because of supply chain disruptions, you are not sure whether you will have uninterrupted supply of raw material to your companies. Manufacturing and sectors like automotive, pharmaceutical, electronics, chemical products face an imminent raw material and component shortage due to shutdown or delay in supply of goods from China, because a lot of countries depend upon China. In fact, China, as you know, is the factory to the entire world. A lot of companies are now rethinking whether that should be the case. And the pandemic has opened the eyes of many countries and many companies into rethinking whether China should continue to supply a lot of the different things that these countries need and these companies need. This is hampering business sentiment and affecting investment and production schedules of companies. Besides impacting imports of various raw materials, the slowdown in manufacturing activity in China and other markets of Asia, Europe, and the US is also dampening India's exports to those countries. Right? Because of supply chain disruption, we are not able to do what we have to do in order to export our products to foreign countries. So here we have some impact on international trade because of the pandemic. Trade disruptions with China has impacted Indian exports of seafood. So we export almost 1,300 crores of seafood to China. I don't know how many of you know that. I did not know that until I started to research on this. We export quite a bit of seafood to China, and that has been disrupted because of the pandemic. Imports from China account for 18% of Indian imports. Again, that's something new. I did not know that 20% of India's imports come from China, especially those related to ceramic, glassware, machinery, and electrical equipment. And all of that has been impacted because of the pandemic. Germany and the UK account for a significant share of Indian exports of leather products, footwear, machinery, and instruments, while Iran is a major export destination for vegetable products. Again, all of that has been impacted because of the COVID. The cancellation of 4 major trade events between February and April. And these trade events were supposed to take place in Gujarat. And they were impacted because of the COVID. And because of that, we had a loss of economic revenue of almost 8,000 to 10,000 crores because of the business opportunity that was lost in both in Gujarat and in Rajasthan in Jaipur. We also have impact of COVID on financial markets. Financial markets have become extremely volatile because of COVID. So as you know, in 2020, when the COVID first hit, the financial markets collapsed. And then companies tried to reinvent themselves. The Indian government, the US government, the Japanese government, they pumped a lot of money, and the stock market again took off. Right. So Bombay Stock Exchange is hitting new highs. But now again, we have uncertainty because of Omicron. And if you look at the US financial markets, the US financial markets acted very poorly this week because of the Omicron variant, because of supply chain disruptions, and because of that, inflation has gone up. When inflation goes up, the Federal Reserve in the US will try to increase interest rates, and that is negatively impacting the stock market in the US. And probably that will happen in India as well. When the Reserve Bank of India, they have been very accommodative. They have reduced interest rates because of COVID. But if inflation picks up, then Reserve Bank of India will also start to increase interest rates, and that will negatively impact the stock markets and financial markets in India as well. Domestic markets have been extremely bearish. So as you know, in 2020, the financial markets were bearish, and then it went back up. And again, over the last week or two, because of Omicron variant, the financial markets are again trying to reevaluate whether the financial markets has to go down because of inflation and because of the Omicron variant. The equity markets likely to remain volatile in future as well. Further wealth erosion of investors is expected. The government will find it tough to meet its ambitious divestment target again this year, right? Because of a lot of uncertainty, it becomes difficult for the government to get out of certain industries where they own. And so, for example, the Indian government divested Air India to the Tata's group, and they had to wait. There was a lot of uncertainty because of COVID before they were able to finally divest Air India, and Tata bought Air India from the Indian government. So what is the most important takeaway of this global pandemic? One of the most important takeaways that India has to take advantage of is to see whether we can supplant China as the factory to the world. So this is an opportunity for India to try to focus on and see whether Make in India can substitute Make in China because of the global pandemic. So we do have, so anytime there is an adversity, there's always some opportunity that is hidden within that adversity. So this is an opportunity for India to see whether we can become a factory to the world, just like China is the factory to the world. So it says, in addition to opportunities arising from COVID-19 induced new normal as listed above, the growing interest of global conglomerates to shift their existing supply chains from China and to other business-inducive economies such as Vietnam and India present a very fine opportunity for India to attract these manufacturing mammoths as elucidated below. In 2020, Japan announced that it has earmarked $2.2 billion of its record economic stimulus package to help its manufacturing shift production out of China as the coronavirus disrupts supply chain between these two trading partners. It is interesting to note that while the recent coronavirus-induced disruptions have just added fuel to the fire for many companies to shift from China began prior to the COVID-19 outbreak on account of rising input costs and the US-China trade war. So this is a wonderful opportunity for a lot of countries, a lot of companies to rethink whether they should rely so much on China. The movement of companies away from China to other less developed countries would trigger a new wave of industrialization. Consequently, the expansion of manufacturing hub linked with global supply chain would increase not only productivity, but also create large-scale employment. India can be a fertile ground for these investments in the supply chain shift. The companies are looking for reasonable prices with quality raw material, large and cost-effective labor force, robust service sector, and developed ports, all of which can be made available in India. If India is able to work on upskilling its labor and provide logistics and transport infrastructure, it can immensely gain to establish itself in the global manufacturing space, which will not only lead to foreign investment on a huge scale, but also will provide the much needed impetus to the economy. So this is a wonderful opportunity for India to try to take advantage of the opportunity that is being presented because of supply chain disruption. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on about 5 or 6 important industry sectors in India and how the supply chain disruption has impacted those industries and what the Indian government has done to try to mitigate those supply chain disruptions in those sectors. So the first thing that I'm focusing on is the automotive sector, which was very badly impacted because of supply chain disruptions. The Indian automotive industry contributes about 7.5% to India's GDP and is a major employment generator. Two-wheelers dominate the industry and has a share of 81% in the domestic automobile sales of 26.3 million units in the fiscal year 2019. The domestic automobile sales increased at a compounded annual growth rate of 6.7% between 2013 and 2018. So the automotive sector has been growing quite rapidly in India. The Indian automotive components industry accounted for 2.3% of India's GDP, 25% of the manufacturing GDP, and provided employment to 5 million people in the year 2018-2019. So what this tells you is that the automotive sector is a very, very important sector in the Indian economy. It provides a lot of employment. It contributes almost 10% to the gross domestic product in India. And so it's very important that the Indian government try to do the best that they can to mitigate any supply chain disruption in the automotive sector. So what you see here is the value chain for the automotive sector. So what are the different stages in the manufacturing and selling of automobiles? Where do we see supply chain disruption? Where do we see value added in the automotive sector? So first one is R&D, research and development, and product design. So for this, we need skilled manpower. We need capacity building. We need innovation in research and development. So the value added here is low to medium value added in this particular part of the supply chain. Then we need raw materials, aluminum, iron and steel, glass, plastic, rubbers. So these are some of the basic raw materials you need in the manufacturing of automobiles. So again, the value added here is relatively low. Automotive component. So these are the components that you need to manufacture automobiles. Drive, transmission, engine components, body and chassis, suspension and braking, electrical and electronics. So these are the various components that we need for automobiles. The value chain here is medium. So we add a medium amount of value to the car or the automobile in this particular part of the value chain. Product assembly. This is where the automobile is actually put together. So we have different automobile manufacturers, right? Maruti Suzuki, Honda, Kia, Hyundai. These are some of the major automobile manufacturers in India. And the value chain is very high. This is where you add the most value to the automobile. Then logistics and transport. So this happens once you manufacture the automobile. So we have warehouses, transporters, exporters, and importers, and the value chain here is low. And finally, we have marketing and sales of the automobiles to customers. Distribution channels includes dealerships, franchise and company outlets, marketing and promotional activities. And the value chain here is low to medium. So what can the government do? What can the companies do to make sure that the impact of any value chain disruptions is minimized? Right? So for example, if you go back to the previous slide, so a lot of the components, for example, from Hyundai or from Japan, in the case of Honda, some of those components are imported from China or from Japan or from Korea and so on and so forth. Because of the pandemic, there have been supply chain disruptions. And that has impacted the manufacturing of automobiles in India. So both companies and the government have to take steps to mitigate the impact of supply chain disruption. So here is how we're going to reimagine the supply chain because of the pandemic. And this reimagination will continue. So it is not just for the pandemic. The pandemic has forced us to rethink how we should go about manufacturing and selling products. And these things will be there in the future as well. So it will not be something that will go away after the pandemic goes away. So we're just trying to rethink, reimagine how businesses should conduct their operations because of the pandemic, and those things will continue even after the pandemic is gone. So here it says for employees, employee safety is crucially important to continue operations and guidelines for how to maintain the factories running or needed. Remote working is a key facilitator, but requires the right technology and IT infrastructure and is not always possible. So as you know, now because of the pandemic, we still conduct conferences. I'm still teaching classes in the US. You're all still learning at Bharat 3000 University, right? So necessity is the mother of invention. So because of the pandemic, we are able to think differently and we're still able to continue to go on with our lives. For customers, social distancing to avoid infection is severely reducing eventual and customer demand in many sectors, such as automotive and the aero sector. Some end customer markets are less impacted, but still difficult to serve due to government lockdown regulations or supply issues. So the pandemic has impacted customer demand. Suppliers, to drive for maximum supply chain efficiency, has taken buffers out of many systems, leading to standstill. So until now, we have been so focused on reducing costs that the supply chain was very, very narrowly focused. And when there's a disruption, all of a sudden, we are impacted in a very big way. So we have to rethink that. The supply chain resilience appears insufficient, but the response is complicated as also local and regional supply chains suffer. So it's not only global supply chains, also the regional supply chains and local supply chains suffer because of lockdown, because of disruption in the movement of products and services, even within the country. Global stock markets have crashed, and many corporations face severe liquidity issues, especially among tier 1 through tier 3 suppliers. Uncertainty around the current crisis is also increasing the awareness of similar threats in the future. Some government initially underestimated the threat and are now reacting with complete lockdowns and isolation. Right? So a lot of countries like Germany went into a lockdown. India, Tamil Nadu is going into a partial lockdown. Bangalore, Karnataka has a lockdown. Delhi has a lockdown. Right? So again, the lockdowns are being reimposed because of the Omicron variant. Government's role for the economy to mitigate current and future pandemic is not yet resolved despite massive support packages. So now, how does this impact supply chain management? So these are some of the issues because of the pandemic. So how do we address those issues? There are certain constraints discovery mechanism to monitor and track possible disruptions. So because of the pandemic, we have to look ahead and say, okay, where do we see possible disruptions to our supply chain? How do we manage those disruptions? How do we find solutions to those disruptions? Budget for bulk inwarding of stock on reopening to limit restart impact. De-risking of supply chain, including exploring vendor financing tie-ups. Communicate with vendors and assess extent of impact to tier 2 and tier 3 supply chain. Preparedness for restart, right? So once everything comes back to normal, do we have everything that we need to fully restart our businesses? So here are some impact of supply chain on the Indian automotive sector. Supply side constraints of BSIV inventory liquidation, 10% sales allowed by authorities, post-lockdown, that too within 10 days. And this is coming from the press, the business press. Indian auto ancillaries and original equipment manufacturers have about 27% import dependence on India for key parts and accessories. So again, if you notice, this is again something surprising that I found out. 27% of our automotive components are imported from China. So here are certain things that we can do to mitigate the supply chain disruption. Rapid realignment of channels, outlets, and products. Liquidity and credit management in the network. Agile sales and service team redeployment. So we have to be very, very quick to respond to supply chain disruptions. Integrated sales and operations planning, demand and supply volatility. So because of the pandemic, there has been a lot of volatility because there's a lot of uncertainty in both demand and supply. Allocation and reprioritization of the framework. Logistics and distribution, securing inbound and outbound flows. repositioning of inventories at regional warehouses. So these are certain things that we can do to minimize supply chain disruption. Manufacturing and plant operations, assess and manage constraints, agility of machines, labor, and material. So you have to be very, very quick in terms of deploying the material, labor, and the machine. Plan for immediate recovery once the economy goes back to normal. Procurement and supply management, supplier risk assessment. So see who your suppliers are and see where we see problems, where we see risks associated with those suppliers because of disruption in the supply chain. Contractual obligation management, open order reset and amendments with various suppliers. Crisis management and governance, remote working capability. And we have seen that that has become very, very important to keep the economy going. Crisis governance and communication and end-to-end compliance report. So this slide shows you how companies can go about managing supply chain disruption. What are the things that they have to do to be able to mitigate the impact of supply chain disruption so that they can still continue to operate their business until the pandemic is resolved. So here are some interventions that the Indian government can do to mitigate supply chain disruptions. Innovative models for easing logistics woes. Engage cab operators and startups to initiate a pickup truck tractor aggregation model for connecting farmers to mandis. Dedicate corridors for auto part suppliers for material movement and customs clearance for provinces cleared for the functioning of COVID-19. Plug and play infrastructure should be provided on such corridors. So dedicate certain corridors so that there's free movement of products and services in those automotive corridors. Possible impact and outcome. This will support the agricultural sector to gear up for harvesting and remove logistical roadblocks currently faced by agrarian community. This will ease logistical bottlenecks and help maintain adequate supplies in critical time. So who are the people that are involved to mitigate these supply chain disruptions? So here are the actors. For the agriculture sector, it is the collectorate, ULBs, village panchayat, mandis, cab aggregators, startups, vehicle owners, farm producers, and distributors. So we have to involve all of these people. Intermediate coordination between ports, rail, and road actors, clearances to be accorded by state and central port authorities, rail and road authorities. So this is for the automotive corridors. Possible risk. So what can go wrong? Disjointed agri-distribution channels and information asymmetry may be an issue in this case, and therefore clear-cut directives, frameworks, and SOPs should be issued to ensure transparency. Coordination and cooperation among multiple states and central authorities has been a complex process, and thus senior level interventions will be needed to smoothen the process. So we have areas where the government can intervene, the possible outcome that we expect out of that intervention, the efforts that are needed to make this happen, and the possible risk that something might go wrong. What are some of the other measures that the government can take? Fiscal measures and other policy interventions. Include automotive industry in the critical sector and make it eligible for dedicated fiscal stimulus bailout package to tide over the crisis. Because as we saw before, the automotive sector contributes almost 10% of the gross domestic product. So it is a critical sector, important sector for the Indian economy. Keep uniform GST for automotive components at 18% for at least 3 years. About 40% of components currently fall in the 28% bracket. So reduce the amount of GST until the pandemic goes away. Offer subsidy or waive off GST on short-term leasing of cars, temporary waiver of regulatory testing costs. So these are some measures that the government can announce to minimize the impact on automotive companies. So what is the possible outcome? These interventions will ensure liquidity in the sector across the value chain with special focus to reduce the impact on MSME and mitigate non-performing loans. What are the efforts that are required? This requires immediate action plan from regulatory agencies headed by the Ministry of Finance, including CBIC and Ministry of transportation in consultation with auto industry bodies and association considering the financial implications. What are some of the risks associated with these measures? Injecting fiscal stimulus by doling out subsidies and affecting waivers will adversely impact sovereign credit rating. So you may have sovereign credit rating agencies reduce the credit score for India, and that will impact how we are able to borrow money as a country. A fund should be created, seeded by government funding about 10% and rest by financial institutions such as LIC, PFC, EPF, etc. This fund should subscribe to bonds of highly rated corporate companies. So that's another way of generating funds to stabilize the automotive sector. Utilizing unspent cesses like education cess and exploring fundraising via multilateral loans and from external private market borrowings. So now I want to talk about the electronics manufacturing sector in India and see how supply chain disruptions impact this important sector. So over the last decade or so, India has witnessed a surge in companies involved in manufacturing of electronic equipment over the last decade. The country currently produces telecommunication products, IT hardware, consumer electronics, medical electronics, industrial electronics, and automotive electronics. India has attracted foreign domestic investment worth about $1.18 billion or 88.5 billion rupees between January 2015 and 19. The investment has primarily been driven by initiatives taken by the Government of India and state government to boost local manufacturing of electronics and electronic components. The government's Make in India program, launched in 2014 by Prime Minister Modi, has helped enhance investment in domestic manufacturing and reducing the country's dependence on imports across sectors. Initiatives such as Modified Special Incentive Package Scheme and Electronic Manufacturing Cluster Scheme have also promoted domestic manufacturing of electronics and helped reduce India's dependence on imports in the electronics industry to some extent. So here's the global supply chain, value chain for the electronics sector. So here are the raw materials: metal, silicon, polycarbonate, glass and plastic, ceramic. So these are some of the basic raw materials that you need for electronic sector. Here are the components and subcomponents that you need for the electronic sector. So here are some active components: integrated circuits, diodes, transistors, vacuum tubes, display batteries, and so forth. Here are some passive components: resistors, capacitors, inductors, transformer, switch, and thermistor. Sub-assemblies: printed circuit board, product and specific parts, and display units. And these are the final products in the electronic sector: consumer electronics, industrial, communication electronics, medical electronics, and computer electronics. And then those products have to be distributed to consumers through retailers, to distributors, medical distributors, and public use by government and institutions. So this is the value chain associated with the manufacturing and selling of electronic products. And then we can have supply chain disruption in any part of this value chain. Right? So some of the raw materials for the electronic sector comes from China. So if China goes into a lockdown, it impacts the value chain for the raw material sector. So here are other value-added functions associated with the electronic sector: research and development, product and process development, design, marketing, and after-sales services. So what is it that the government can do to mitigate supply chain disruption in the electronic sector as a result of the still ongoing pandemic? Demand creation. So what can they do to increase the demand for electronic products? Reduce GST rates for a limited period for high volume electronics like mobile phones, TVs, and ACs to boost demand. So temporarily reduce GST so that people are able to afford and buy electronic products, and that increases the demand for electronic products. Possible outcome of this measure, this will stimulate demand for high volume electronics items, leading to increased transactions and cash flow. So what are some of the efforts? What do we need to do to increase demand? Identification of key 20% electronic products contributing to a majority of electronic sales in the country on the basis of 80-20 rule, the law of vital few, through the GST tax collection data. So we look at the GST tax collection data and focus where we have maximum value that is added in the electronic sector. Tax incentives in the form of short-term GST rate cuts for identified electronic items for boosting demand. Reduce GST on mobile phones to 12% from 18%, and for TVs and ACs from 28% to 18% to boost demand. GST Council and Ministry of Finance to undertake the assessment and notify the identified goods and revise GST rates for a specified duration or period. So these are some things that we can do, the government can do to boost demand in the electronic sector. What are some of the risks? Other industries may also demand reduction of GST. So the other companies will go to the government and say, hey, you know what? Why are you showing preferential treatment only for the electronic sector? So they may ask for reduction in GST as well. The government may identify key products in those industries, and based on the revenue contribution, sales percentage, it could introduce rate cuts for a short period and increase the rates at a later stage in a staggered manner. Tap foreign investors and encourage foreign domestic investment. That's another thing that the government can do. Offer policy support for stimulating investments in the electronic sector. The effective policy framework for stimulating investment in the sector will lead to increased indigenous manufacturing, improved infrastructure and supply chain, increased employment opportunities, and export potential. So what are the things that the government has to do? Expediting the release of operational guideline and implementing mechanism for the 3 new schemes launched by the government, namely PL1, SPECS, and EMC 2.0. So these are some special schemes that the union government has extended to increase foreign domestic investment in India. The electronic policy for several states has different definitions on product coverage. MEITY may hence issue policy framework, that is MEIT is Ministry for Electronics Industry, issue policy framework for the states to review the existing policy and others to formulate one. Reopen MSIP scheme for end products not covered under the SPEC scheme. This will further entice foreign firms in the electronic sector. The finished electronic goods segment needs to be promoted in the short term for tapping firms planning to move out of countries such as China. The reopening of MSIP scheme may lead to budget constraints. So those are some of the issues that we may face if the government were to take these measures. Moving on to the next sector, which is the food processing sector in India, which is again another large sector that is impacted because of supply chain disruptions. The market size of the Indian food processing industry is estimated to be $543 billion. In rupees, it is 40.73 trillion rupees, and the sector accounted for 1.6% of India's total gross value added in 2017-18. India's processing capacity, however, is quite low currently, and therefore there's a huge potential for growth. At present, India processes less than 10% of its agricultural output, only about 2% of fruits and vegetables, 6% of poultry, 20% of meat, 23% of marine, and 35% of milk. So there's a lot of opportunity for food processing in India. Most of the processing done in India is primarily processing, that is milling of grains, sugar, and edible oil. The primary processing offers low value added. Then secondary processing, such as processing of high value items such as fruits and vegetables, bakery, chocolates, dairy, and ready to cook meals, among others. So we still do only primary processing. India still does not do high value added processing. India's food ecosystem offers huge growth opportunity for businesses to invest in the sector and gain from its potential growth. So here's the value chain for the food processing sector. The raw material, producers, farmers, breeders, fishermen, agricultural produce, fruits and vegetables, meat and poultry, marine and inland water products, beverages, and milk. These are the raw material. These are the warehousing, cold storage, logistics. We need agriculture, cold storage for agricultural produce, because otherwise, the agricultural produce, they don't last for a very long period of time. We need adequate warehousing, conventional vehicles, and reefer vehicles. Processing, food and vegetable processing, meat processing, milk processing, and milling for grains. Grading and packaging, which includes quality control, grading, packaging. And finally, distribution and marketing, branding of the products, food products, retailers, wholesalers, institutions, and the export market. So this chart shows you the value chain for the food processing sector. So what can the Indian government do to help mitigate the supply chain disruption in the food processing sector? So once again, demand generation. Increase number of crops under the purview of MSP procurement for 3 to 4 crop cycles. So minimum sustainable price. Start crop procurement and mandi operations at block level by permitting 1/3 of total agents to work at a time and promote token system. This will stabilize prices of crops and also help in monetary realization for farmers. What are some of the efforts required? The government should issue notification of updated list of items and MSP as well as SOP for mandi operations. There's a need for a mobile-based application that can offer crop registration facilities and crop procurement services. Responsibility, state government, APMCs, and industries and farmers, they should be responsible for these efforts. Social distancing measures should be mandated and monitored closely to reduce the risk of infection. Because the risk of infection is very, very high in the agricultural sector. Liquidity support. Allow 10 to 15 days for payment of primary procurement instead of mandated upfront payment. Reduce mandi tax across tax states and waive off double charging of mandi tax in case of procurement from other states for next 3 months. Possible impact, the food processing industries face working capital cash crunch, can resume operations very quickly. It will also allow for unrestricted movement of raw material produce for processing, resulting in lower crop wastage and losses. So what are the efforts that are required to make this happen? The state government to issue orders allowing direct procurement with provision of staggered payment, that is 40% upfront, 30% in 7 days, and remaining 30% in 15 days. The industries can issue a post-dated check or tie up with local banks, and APMC or mandi agents can become third-party guarantors. What is the risk associated with this step? There's risk of payment failure, but it can be mitigated by considering the amount in working capital loans against industries and credit arrangements with local nationalized banks. No mandi tax will mean loss of revenue for the state government. What about infrastructure development? Increase silos and warehousing capabilities. Promote greenhouse dryers and other dehydration techniques. This will prevent crop wastages and crop losses, as well as increase shelf life of fruits, vegetables, and other perishable food items. The government can allow operation of temporary silos in fallow, unused government land and give subsidy for creating greenhouse dryers for fruits and vegetables. It'll take a long time for rolling out these technologies at farm level. They can be mitigated through focused training program. So these are some things that the government can do to help the farm sector, the agricultural sector, and the food processing sector. Moving on to the next sector, which is the gems and jewelry sector in India. Again, this is a very important sector of the Indian economy. The gems and jewelry sector account for 7% of India's GDP, around 15% of the total merchandise exports. India is the leader in exports of cut and polished diamonds and exported 75% of the world's polished diamond in 2019. India ranked second globally in diamond exports and shipped stones valued at $23 billion. The sector currently employs 4.6 million people, and this number is likely to rise to 8.23 million in 2022, which is this year. The sector attracted about 1.16 billion of foreign domestic investment between April 2000 and March of 2019. Again, a very important sector in the Indian economy. Here's a value chain for the gems and jewelry sector. Exploration, major reserves. So a lot of the reserves for jewelry are in these countries: Russia, Congo, Australia, Botswana, South Africa, Angola. So this is where you have the diamonds and other precious metals and gems. We don't have them in India. Here are the key players, key companies that mine these precious metals and gems: Alrosa, De Beers, Dominion, Rio Tinto, and Petra Diamonds. So these are some of the major miners. Rio Tinto is based out of Australia, De Beers is based out of South Africa, and so forth. Sorting and distribution, major place, mostly carried out by the miners. Other distribution centers are small and fragmented. Cutting and polishing. A lot of the cutting and polishing of diamonds occurs in India, particularly in Gujarat. Belgium, Israel is another place, USA, China, Thailand, and South Africa. But India is the very major player, particularly for diamond and cutting and polishing and gemstones. So here are some of the major retailers. Tiffany, based in the US, Danish, based in India, and so forth. So what can the Indian government do to mitigate supply chain disruption in the gems and jewelry sector? Give additional 1-year moratorium for fulfillment of export obligations under the EPCG scheme, diamond import licensing, and other similar government scheme. So give an extension because of the supply chain disruption. The moratorium period will help the industry to adhere to requirement of schemes. The government should make amendments under various schemes for the revised moratorium period. So give them some time to fulfill under those schemes. Ease of doing business. Set up hallmarking centers to provide confidence to customers. The mandatory hallmarking compliance will ensure product quality and result in time and cost saving for traders. The hallmarking center should be established taluka-wise, zilla-wise under CFC Cluster Development Scheme. Supporting the workforce. Support vulnerable segment under MGN REGA. The covered of unorganized workers under the scheme for the lockdown period will offer some support. The help of JEPC and respective associations should be taken to bring the unorganized workers under organized sectors. So there's a lot of unorganized workers in the jewelry and gem sector in Gujarat. Identify and convincing unorganized workers to register has always faced resistance. So that's some of the risk. What about some long-term strategy? Develop long-term vision and strategy. Long-term development vision, strategy, reevaluation, and contingency plans. This will help in revival of sustainable development of the sector. GJEPC government should develop the vision, plan, and strategy. The import and export value chain analysis must be done to plug the gap and enhance local production and employment opportunities. Demand creation, export promotion. 75% of the jewels and jewelry and gemstones are exported. This will lead to increase in foreign exchange earnings. GJEPC should identify and tap new markets such as Russia, Brazil, Vietnam, and Australia with the help of the government. The government will need to support in creating awareness and capacity building programs for medium and small scale enterprises to be able to meet international design and quality standards. Moving on to the next sector, information technology sector, another important sector in the Indian economy. The IT industry contributes about 8% of India's GDP and employs more than 4 million people. There are about 5,300 technology startups in the country, and the sector majorly helps fuel their growth. The Indian IT sector is witnessing a compounded annual growth rate of 8.7%, which is approximately 3 to 4 times higher than the growth rate of global IT sector. The Indian government has identified IT as one of the 12 champion service sectors, given its significant contribution to the GDP and employment generation. It's another important sector in the Indian economy. So here are certain things that the government can take to mitigate supply chain disruption in the IT sector. Amend rule-based approach to 50% employees to come to office to a number of employees based upon the floor area available. This approach will ensure social distancing in offices. Ministry of Home Affairs should revise guidelines in this area. This may require close coordination between local, municipal, and health authorities. So again, as you know, with the new partial lockdown announced on January 6th, once again, they allow only for 50% of employees in offices to allow for social distancing. Widen the spectrum of digitization initiative in the US 1.36 trillion national infrastructure pipeline projects. This will help increase demand through internal growth drivers. The central government should advise all state governments. The project details should be revisited and a progressive procurement framework should be developed. Revisiting the project details may require additional significant work. Allow for 50% GST exemption on outsourced businesses to MSMEs and startups by large companies for 6 months. This will lead to more business flowing to MSMEs and startup. GST Council needs to issue the order for the 50% exemption. Speedy approval of Mudra loans and disbursement by CGT MSE. This will support startup and help in more employment generation. The government needs to allocate more funds to Mudra and CGT MSE. There's also an urgent need to remove bottlenecks, upgrade and digitize the application and disbursement procedure, as well as reevaluation and benchmarking of disbursement criteria. The key risk pertains to budgetary constraint. A mitigation measure could be in terms of 10 to 20%. Mobility curb. Identification of key destination where client deliverables are getting affected because of the lockdown. Prioritization of IT businesses in key geographies and development of travel protocol with particular countries for monitoring and regulating travel. These measures will improve ease of doing business, also reduce logistics constraint. The Ministry of Economic Affairs should develop travel protocol in association with practitioner countries. Key business and geographies must be mapped and key client deliverables should be identified in order to do a risk-benefit analysis. The practitioner countries may restrict immigration because of the pandemic. So that takes me to the last sector that I want to talk about today, and that is the leather sector, another key industrial sector in India. The government of India has identified leather as one of the focus sectors because of its immense potential for export, growth, and employment generation. The leather sector's total value stood at $17.85 billion in financial year 2018-19. Exports were $5.85 billion, domestic market $12 billion. The compounded annual growth rate for the sector for 5 years is 8.6%. Shipment of different category of footwear accounts for about 50% of total exports. The labor-intensive leather sector, which is dominated by MSMEs, provides jobs to around 4.5 million people in the country. So here's the value chain for the leather sector. Stage of processing, livestock. So livestock are cattle and other livestock that we use for leather, right? And unavailability of livestock, restricted operations, decrease in demand, and long-term impact, reduction in demand for unprocessed or non-certified meat products. Raw hides and skin, limited availability of raw material because of supply chain disruption, unavailability of workforce. So when that happens, there's an increased dependency on imports, challenge to import substitution. Tannery operations and post-train tanning. Operational difficulty in opening up tanneries after the lockdown, maintaining the health and sanitization protocols for workers in the tanneries. decreased capacity of production due to weak demand, cost effectiveness and environmental challenges in the long term. Finished leather and products, halt in production due to cancellation of orders, transport and logistic issue due to restrictions. Limited new orders from domestic and international markets and delay in payments. Reduced overall demand leading to less margins. Sales and export. Negligible sales and export because of supply chain disruption, because of the pandemic, closing of all retail and wholesale stores. Travel restrictions leading to limited branding and marketing activities, especially in Europe and the US. International competition from China, Vietnam, and Bangladesh, which also export a lot of leather products. So here are certain things that the government can do in the leather sector. Offer wage subsidies to benefit small industries and income support for contract workers for a period of 3 months. Possible impact, the basic income will provide support to daily workers. Efforts required, there's a need to study the feasibility and impact assessment of quantum of subsidies to be given to workers. Possible risk, identify the key beneficiaries for wage subsidies. The usage of Aadhaar-based common database for disbursement of subsidies will prevent leakage and duplicity across schemes by central and state government. Here are some policy interventions that the government can do. Increase import duty on leather finished goods and raw material, which can be manufactured locally in the short term. This will lead to increase in sale of local products and also help in employment generation. The government should issue notification for increase in import duty after analyzing products that can be manufactured locally. There will be an initial rise in raw material costs. The required machinery and chemical for finished leather production will be unavailable, but the government can provide necessary common infrastructure support to overcome this problem. Reduce GST on all domestic leather products from 28% to 12%. This will enable Indian leather products to become equally competitive to the low-cost imported products and lead to increase in domestic sale of leather products. GST Council should issue the notification to reduce the GST rate from 28% to 12%. Revenue loss for government may get compensated due to increased sales in the future. So what are some things that the government can do in the medium term? Provide grant in aid for development and maintenance of all common infrastructure. This will enable leather industries get faster environmental clearance and also increase their production capacities. The government should increase the fund allocation for setting up of CETP under sub-scheme of leather technology innovation. So that takes me to our last slide in today's presentation on supply chain disruption as a result of COVID-19 in India. So these are the 5 important takeaways because of the supply chain disruption. The first important takeaway is this. As per International Labour Organization, COVID-19 pandemic is affecting 2.7 billion workers globally due to lockdowns. In India, the number of workers in the informal economy is and will continue to be severely affected by the lockdown and other containment measures. For labor-intensive sectors such as textile, agriculture, hospitality, cost of labor constitutes a major figure in the supply chain. With a significant dip in business, Indian companies might look at layoffs, at least temporarily. Consequently, there'll be a shortage of workers due to temporary migration of workers to their homes, but simultaneously, there will be a lot of people willing to work, but with no jobs left. Second takeaway, market demand shocks. The pandemic will result in a sluggish or postponed customer demand due to job losses, reduced income levels, low sentiment due to uncertainty. The epidemic might stimulate the demand for first purchase opportunity, but it is difficult to ascertain the magnitude of change in demand. Supply chain disruption. Demand shock will lead to fall in future sales and profitability of firms. This combined with heightened uncertainty will result in closure of businesses and supply chain disruptions. Due to the high degree of integration and interdependence of value chains across economy lockdown, the extent of impact on the economy will be multifold. India's high dependence on China will also cause major disruptions in the supply of raw material. Most sectors are set to see production delays, reduced shipping and freight options, store closures, while drop in revenue may prevent companies from meeting operational expenses. Upon reopening of production units across the globe, the availability of cargo vessels carriers will be limited, and this will not only lead to delayed shipments, but also increased logistics cost. The fourth implication, liquidity crunch. The Indian economy will be strained with working capital liquidity crunch due to production shutdowns in the wake of nationwide lockdown and continuing payment toward fixed costs. Cash flow constraints will continue even post-lockdown because of reduced demand, resulting in reduced inventory stockpile, with MSMEs being the worst hit. Cash flow challenges might see increase in non-performing loans due to non-repayment. Major impact on MSMEs. MSME sector contributes to about 25% of India's GDP from services activities and over 33% in the manufacturing output of the country. MSMEs work on shorter working capital cycles, and hence they are most impacted due to lockdown and nil demand of most products and services. So those are some of the most important takeaways of COVID-19 on the Indian economy and the resulting supply chain disruption because of COVID-19. And that concludes my presentation for today.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you.
And once again, I thank Dr.M.Selvam for organizing this conference, and it has always been my pleasure to attend the conference. And I wish I was able to personally visit Chichi and meet Dr.M.Selvam. Thank you once again.
Thank you, sir. Are you able to hear us? Hello? What are thanks for time 11:30, sir. 11:30.
Saying thank you is more than good manner, it is good spirituality. Now we invite young Prakati of first MBA to propose vote of thanks. On behalf of our department, it's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks on this auspicious occasion. My heart fills with lot of gratitude and respect for our head of the department, Dr.M.Selvam, Chair School of Business Studies, for arranging this special event. Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to heartfully thank our chief guest, Dr. Shankaran Venkateshwar, St. Mary's College of California, USA, who virtually gave a lecture on the topic, Impact of COVID-19 on India's supply chain. Sir, your lecture was very informative and useful. It gives a 360-degree view on supply chain in India. Thank you for your lecture, sir. Our special Professor S. I.M. former Senior Professor of Economics, Bharatidasan University, for his valuable presence at this international webinar. Thank you, sir. Our special thanks to participants who joined virtually for this webinar. Your involvement and interaction made this session live. Our hearty thanks to our department faculty members, PhD scholars, my classmates, and my seniors for their cooperation in making this session a grand success. Once again, I extend my hearty thanks to everyone who supported. Thank you.
Isaiah?
Yes, sir.
I'm in the line.
I'm online, sir.
Okay. Happy to see you. How are you?
I'm fine, sir.
Okay.
Good morning, Dr. Shankaran Venkateshwar, sir.
Yeah. So, sir, Madam Chandran,
Yes, sir.
Power in the line.
I'm doing fine, sir.
Yeah. You can take half an hour.
That's fine.
Okay. Welcome.
Yeah.
Immediately start the next session.
And welcome to previously for me today and goes back. I'm here for virtually of us can be to welcome the special guest of this meeting.
A very precious morning to each and everyone present here. First of all, I would like to welcome our head of department, Dr. M. Selvam, Head, Department of Commerce and Financial Studies, for arranging this incredible international webinar. I'm glad to welcome you, sir. Today marks the 17th International Webinar on Dynamics on Emerging Business Innovation and Trends, Academy Industry Role, Debit Air 2022, and 13th Smart Journal Annual Awards 2021. I am extremely delighted to be the host of Welcome You All. On behalf of the department, I convey my regards to the chief guest of the session, Dr.M.Selvam, Senior Lecturer, Researcher and PhD Coordinator, Graduate School, Beautiful University, Uganda. He is an experienced teacher and researcher. He served as the head of Department of Banking and Finance at All Nations University College. He is skilled in word processing, lecturing, curriculum development, and public speaking, strong in finance. He joined virtually to give a lecture on effect of pandemic and needs for banking restructuring and innovation. Hearty welcome you, sir.
Isaiah is our alumni member. He did his PhD here. We are very happy. Okay, carry on.
And welcome to Professor S. I.M. and the participants jointly virtually of this webinar. The thirst for knowledge made this webinar a successful one. Next, I would like to welcome our department faculty members, PhD research scholars, my dear seniors and my classmates. Once again, and with immense and pleasure, I welcome you all.
Okay, Isaiah, we'll carry on. Over to browser, Isaiah.
Thank you, sir. And the distinguished guests, Professor M.Selvam, faculty members of the department, and the university at large, I want to thank you for the opportunity to give me to share my views on the topic that you have. As Professor Selvam has just pointed, I'm his son, and I call him myself his son because I am today because of him. I did my PhD in this department under his guidance, so I can just appreciate that still Dr. M.Selvam is stretching wide and wide, not only in India, but far away from India as well. So I thank him for such a chance and opportunity that gave me a chance to take over this program. So I don't know whether I'm going to screen, sir, or you are going to screen from there.
Isaiah?
Are you going to screen from there, or I can also screen from here?
Yeah, please.
Let me see. I'm requesting if it can be done from there, sir.
Yes. Do it. Do your PPT here.
Can you do the PPT from there?
Do that. You can receive your PPT from you. Yes, sir.
Yes. I don't know, is it visible over there?
Yes, visible. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I want to thank you once again for the chance that you've given me to share the views over the topic, the effects of pandemic and the needs for banking restructuring and innovation. My name is just Isaiah and I did my research under Dr. M.Selvam. That's why, of course, you could reach me and get a request for the presentation, and also, as a matter of fact, always I have to do my best to do the necessary. I'm a senior lecturer and a researcher and a PhD coordinator at the graduate school of Uganda University of which the graduate school has 4 programs, of which there are almost 18 scholars doing research under the university or under for this program. So that's what currently I'm heading. So getting back to our topic today, we all understand the pandemic has really done a lot, not really very little we can say, but the pandemic has really done bad than we can say good. So the topic or the what we are going to look at, basically we are going to see what exactly is the effect of it, and of course what will be the restructuring part of it, that is to achieve the targets. So just to move forward at my next slide, we are just going to look at first the impact of this COVID-19. As we all know, we've had a financial crisis, we've had a number of pandemics, but now in reference to the pandemic, the COVID-19 we are referring to here, we are just going to look at how it came in basically. No, we are talking of that the pandemic that is coming in the form of health reasons. So the economic impact for the COVID-19 crisis is very different from the global financial crisis of 2007, 2009, and other past financial crises or business cycle downturns. The global financial crisis caused a disruption in financial intermediation, which by its nature had a deflation character. The impact, of course, again, continuing there, the current crisis started as a health crisis, and we all know this, that it started all the way from China, and that as it extended all the way to the rest of the world. So it started as a health crisis, and now it's a combination of demand side and the supply side, because a lot is just being required, and a lot is supposed to be given out. So there's that demand side and the supply side shocks that is at the risk of becoming a long-standing economic crisis. Of course, this one is not just by mere thing, that we can also just accept the fact that it has affected most countries' economies. So the pandemic has delivered the worst set back to poverty in generations. Of course, World Bank Group projects in 2021, approximately 120 to 150 million people will be. It was just estimated that people will lose or will be just pushed into poverty. It's just of a reason being, a lot had come to a standstill. We can talk of where technology has not reached. We can just give reference to Africa, as well, of course, some other continents where technology has not reached. So you can imagine how they must have been pushed right down to poverty level. So our findings suggest that an estimated of 250 million jobs have been lost around the world. This one we have just seen it, and we have seen it, how it has really impacted the whole world. We have seen it. I can give just a reference personally. I visited my family, that is 2020, in month of March, and then of which I was not allowed to go back because the lockdowns were just put in place. In a way, my job was just terminated. So a lot like that, and what I could just gather from around, a number of people lost their jobs. What are some of the sectors which were mostly affected? So these are, you can see the slides here, there's just a number of sectors that were mostly affected, but mostly they've been learned anyway. And this is just a data that I got it from the World Bank Group website. And of course, what you can see there, the hotel industry, tourism industry, entertainment industry, the effect, it was as much as 56%. Actually, the most affected area. I can just give it a highlight from where I come from. Along the Mombasa, that is Indian Ocean, along the Mombasa line, that is where normally Kenya fetches a lot of tourism exchange. Unfortunately, during the pandemic from that is 2020 onwards, it has been under lockdown. It was just opened recently, not long ago, and you can imagine if they used to make a lot, just talk of, they were just making a lot within a month or just a day, but then unfortunately, having that it was just under lockdown, a lot just went into a mess. So a lot of jobs, of course, were just lost, and a lot must have gone into a mess. So the other sector that was mostly affected was transport, logistics, and aviation, which was also affected up to almost 30%. And we had also some sectors, the sector that's fast moving consumer goods, which was also affected up to 28%. Trade also was also affected up to 24%. Construction and real estate was affected up to 23%. Clothing and textiles 16%. All other sectors up to 16%. Services 13%. Food and agriculture was 12%. Manufacturing was 11%. Energy and mining was 11%. Automotive was 11%. Education was 3%. Health and pharmaceutical companies, of course, was 2%. So those were most affected sectors during this pandemic. And of course, we've seen a lot that is happening. Now, after over 20 plus years of progress, the pandemic is now negatively affected the macro, small and medium enterprises development segment. So, like you can talk of the SME ability to repay their loans significantly adversely affected in short to medium term. This is generated by supply chain disruptions due to lockdowns, delayed receivable collections, drain in cash flows due to fixed expenses, sectors impact, and labor constraints. So we can see again, MSME customers in urban locations are vulnerable, and rural MSME are outside the reach of financial institutions. SMEs, we've seen also that they dependent on import-export supply chains are most exposed to disruptions and reductions in demand. Actually, we have seen what the previous presenter has just presented on this, the supply, the disruptions. We've seen it like in the scenario we gave in India. So it is just not only in India, it's just all over. The scenario that he has presented is just purely all over, not only, well, he just gave a reference to India, but then it's just all over. So obviously, we cannot only know there that the cases is disproportionately impacting SMEs and the informal sector. And estimated 81% of 2.7 million former workers globally have been affected by the lockdowns. This is actually what, of course, as I give a reference, personally, I was affected because of the lockdowns. I was just closed and I couldn't just go to my workplace. And by default, I was just terminated till I got back to the working place, and then my contract will continue. Again, on the same note, SMEs dependent on import-export supply chains are most exposed to disruptions and in demand. That suggests that many countries have experienced a decline in the number of bankruptcy filings in 2020, but World Bank Group considers that the numbers will increase. There is a rise in disruption and bankruptcy of US firms at the top of the value chain. Evidence suggests that insolvency proceedings are on the rise as well, especially with the larger firms. For example, 147 companies globally with greater turnover and 6 million became insolvent in 2020. So that is just a scenario. We could see what exactly World Bank sector, what were just those challenges, the global banking sector challenges. We had a number of challenges, but I've just quoted a few of which to just support banks' strength compromised. Of course, that is right now. The contraction in the global economy has already diminished loan growth and the payment transaction volume. The banks overall with weak capital position posed a threat to economic growth, as lending will only be channeled into the most creditworthy. The other part that was also was a challenge was also the regulation part of it. Of course, support in terms of NPL, recognition, management, resolution, and capitalization would be necessary to face the pandemic. The other part, of course, the banking challenge was the low interest rates. This will just, in any case, for those of you who are just investors, just felt it. In any case, we have got all the loans, and maybe in any case, we had a loan. No, there was all those challenges that was also in place. So we know that the interest remained low for the substantial period of time, which is beneficial in the short run and has a risk for banks in the long run, as NPLs, that's non-performing loans, continue to increase and threaten banks insolvent bank solvents. What were some of the early impact of COVID-19 on financial institutions? Actually, there was just a lot, and I've just put it a few of which we need to look ahead, and of course, you can just let them, they're just a number of them. So problems of corporate segment are going to be compounded by weaknesses of the financial sector. 7 months from the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, IBS financial institutions clients were still operating at about 8% of pre-crisis levels. The vast majority of financial institutions were reporting lower on collection and disbursement level. This was just all over. Actually, it was just all over. Like, you can't go for it when you are not really ready. If you are not in a position of, in any case, just to give it back on the interest rates that they're putting in place. So, despite the widespread restructuring of portfolios, financial institutions started to register significant increases in performing as non-performing assets. The other thing we could see also is just diversification of funding sources was also one critical, especially the development of retail deposits. And we could see also the financial institutions managed to preserve liquidity, partly aided by a strong deposit level through the first months of the crisis. So, what were some of these early impacts of what continued? We could see that now the crisis led the financial institutions to assign even greater priority to the digital transformation of front and back end operations, as well as the development of retail deposits as a key funding strategy. So, strategies adapted by banks for customer business continuity amidst the crisis were just like the following. They were just some of the strategies were being adopted during that COVID-19 or the early impact during the early impact of this COVID-19. So, digitalization of processes and the products, which was also adopted up to 64%. Online customer service also was just adopted up to 30%. Restructured existing loans also up to 24%. Issued moratorium or suspensions were just up to 12%. Provided support to affected customers up to 10%. Utilized government or device support was up to 9%. Waived fees and penalties was up to 6%. Provided grace periods, extensions up to 5%, and the other adaptations were also up to 4%. I'm just going to switch there. Of course, where it's just also you can find it from. And you can see that the crisis has completely changed the scenario. Banks had to operate with the least number of employees on premises and more working from home. Banks encouraged the use of digital solutions and platforms. So we look at these negotiations actually were presented from yesterday, and of course that is the scenario that is ongoing. Of course, I can just say the scenario of cite some examples from where I come from. That's a number of companies, banking companies, majority workers, majority lost their jobs. Those actually were just retained. You find them they are working in turns, like maybe twice a week, like that, or alternative. And then the majority again, those who are just retained, also many of them just be working from home. So you can see the technology is just changing all over, or the impact of this COVID-19 has really impacted, has really affected, and things are changing from day to day. So what was some of this regulatory response to COVID-19? So there could be a number of categories, number of them, but then there's just 6 main categories of interventions. So number one, of course, was credit payment suspensions. There could be also supporting or facilitating the restructuring of loans. There's also this relaxation in the classification and or provisioning of non-performing assets, and then injecting liquidity and easing monetary conditions, leasing or deferring existing capital buffers, and of course lastly interest rates reliefs or deferments or tax exemptions. So these were some of the responses that, of course, the regulators had to look at, and then had to accustom them at least for the business to work out, in any case, for the banking sector to proceed or to go on. What were some of these restructuring? So, banking restructuring, because banks lie at the center, actually the banking sector plays an important role in the economy, and it's really, if it's not properly catered for, a lot will just go into a mess. So, because banks lie at the center of modern economies, policies related with the bank restructuring can have far-reaching implications, political as well as economic. This is particularly important in these times where so many economies are struggling and banking system are challenging due to COVID-19. Banks restructuring is one of the most difficult tasks confronting policymakers. Measures might be decided quickly and sometimes in the eye of a crisis, guided by perfect information. The approach or response the government uses depends on several factors such as the political economy, economic conditions, government's fiscal situation, scale and the severity of the problem, and the financial health of specific banks system, or limitations of the legal and regulatory framework and institutional technical capacity of the solvents and involved institutions, among others. The other thing we consider, so the government should strongly support supervisors in the event of decision related to closing insolvent banks. Fiscal resources might need to be committed to fixing problems in the banking sector, and of course, we also want to have the transparency. Arrangements might be adopted at an early stage to deal with non-performing loans, or so a core of healthy banks that continue to facilitate economic development. This includes recognizing problem assets, supporting bank-led and system-wide and non-performing loans, solutions, strategies, and generating the enabling settlement environment, which includes insolvency and creditors' rights. What's now the rapid response of this World Bank to this COVID-19? There is a lot that, of course, World Bank has done and, of course, yet to do. But just what I've just pointed out to of what, of course, the World Bank has done to most affected countries, economies in the world, at least to pick up and then make something, of course, what the growth of the economy, the growing of the economy. Of course, number one, it is they have just given 8 billion in financing committed. They have just given that. That is, World Bank is taking fast comprehensive action to save lives, protect the poor and the vulnerable, achieve sustainable growth, and build in better ways. Between April and December 2020, financing committed included over $30 billion of new concessional transfers from either with built-in debt relief for countries at risk of debt distress. What again World Bank Group has also done, they have just given 12 billion health support. Of course, this one I can attest that Kenya received part of this package, and I know most countries have just received this. And so they have just done launched COVID-19 emergency health support to strengthen country responses and program to cushion economic impact. Lastly, of course, the last part of my last slide, the plan was what they have included $8 billion for private sector, helping the private sector cope with the impact of the pandemic. Keeping companies solvent is key to saving jobs and limiting the economic damage. New investment, trade, finance, and working capital lines to grants focus on MSMEs so that they can resume their key contributions.
Please hurry up.
Yes, sir. And job creation. In addition, the multilateral investment guarantee agency launched a 6.5 billion facility to support private sector investors and lenders in tackling the pandemic. Lastly, the webinars, they have just held programs online, which of course just in any case to enhance and try to help out the economies to grow. That is part of IFC's COVID-19 crisis response was to provide webinars covering portfolios, stress, testing, SMEs, finance, and digitalizing, among others, to banks and FIs. So that is my last slide. And of course, thank you, sir, for the chance. And if anything, let me know, and then we'll see how to can go forward. Thank you, sir. Thank you, and thank you all.
Thank you. Lecture was very informative. My sincere appreciation for your efforts taken. Hello, Isaiah?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my sincere appreciation for your efforts taken.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Showing gratitude is one of the simplest yet most powerful things human can do for each other. Now we invite motivated PhD research scholars to report for our friends.
சீக்கிரம்
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். அகர முதல எழுத்தெல்லாம் ஆதி பகவன் முதற்றே உலகு. Good afternoon to all the all gathered here. First of all, I thanks to Almighty, I, Mrs. C. Bhuvaneshwari, on behalf of the Bardhasan University and the entire fraternity of the institution. First of all, extend my most sincere thanks to Almighty God for making today's event a resounding success. With His blessings and grace, we are able to make this event what it was. Thank you, God. Next, thanks to resource person. This course is suitable for resource person Isaiah Onsarigo Miancha. Levin said, creativity is picking up new things. Innovation is doing new things. I extend a really hearty vote of thanks to our resource person, Dr. Isaiah Onsarigo Miancha, who spent time from his busiest schedule to praise the occasion. His insightful special lecture on effects of pandemic and needs for banking restructuring and innovation was full of wisdom and information. Today we had an opportunity to hear your thoughts, impact of COVID-19, most affected sectors of COVID-19, global banking sector challenges, early impact of COVID-19 on financial institutions, regulatory response to COVID-19, bank restructuring, World Bank Group rapid response to COVID-19, and this will surely be going to encourage us in our future events. Thank you, sir. Next, I thank to our HOD. This course is suitable for our HOD. A leader is on who knows the way, goes the way and shows the way. Peter Drucker said leadership is defined by results, not attitudes. Next, I would like to thank our respected Professor Dr.M.Selvam and okay. Thank you, HOD sir, and thank you, teachers. Thank you, IMLA sir. Thank you, PhD scholars and MBA first year and second year students. Thank you, all and all guests. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, Professor Bala. Geeta. Yes, Professor Bala. Okay. Hello. One minute here. Professor Bala. All right. Good afternoon, Professor Bala.
Bala, we can't hear you, Bala.
Bala, sir?
We can't hear you, Bala.
Yes, to unmute his mic.
Yes, Professor Bala. Yes. Professor Bala, unmute your mic. Yeah, please. Yeah, please. We are not able to hear you. Let's try. Okay. Okay. Let's try.
Bala, maybe you should exit and come back again. We can't still hear you. Exit and come back, yeah.
Hello, Gina.
Hi, Dr.M.Selvam.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you? That's a good conference.
Thank you for your compliments.
Hi, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I think Prof. Bala has to exit and come back. He should be okay.
Yeah, we will wait.
All right. I hope I can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that.
Please be on the line. We will welcome you first.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Can you see my slides if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Welcome back to the fifth plenary session of the 17th International Seminar on Dynamics of Emerging Business Innovation and Trends, Academia Industry Role, Debit Air 2022. Now, we may request Shirley of second MBA to propose to deliver the welcome address.
Good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all for the fifth plenary session. First of all, I would like to welcome our head of the department, Dr.M.Selvam, head Department of Commerce and Financial Studies for this webinar. We welcome you, sir. Next, I would like to welcome the resource person, Dr. Subramanian, Sam Houston, State University, USA, who joined visually to deliver a lecture on effects of COVID-19 on globalization. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to welcome Professor S. Ayam, former Senior Professor of Economics, Bardhasan University, for this plenary session. We welcome you, sir. Next, I would like to welcome our department faculty members and our students. We welcome you all.
Over to Professor Bala.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyways,
We are able to see your slide. Go ahead.
okay, good. Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. Sorry for the delay. I don't know why my audio did not want to cooperate with me. Anyway, I was very pleased to see Isaiah after a long time. And Dr. Selvam, thank you for giving us the opportunity to present remotely and participate in this annual conference. I truly do miss coming to Trichy and meeting everybody in person. So hopefully.
Please come again. Please come again.
Yes. Okay. Let me. My topic again. It's more on a macro scale on the effects of COVID-19 on globalization. And please, I am going to skip over a lot of my slides because I did prepare a longer presentation, but I'll try to keep it within my next 20 minutes or so. Let me just jump in and sort of share with you my abstract. Basically, this COVID-19 has been a true challenge from a global perspective. And really, the purpose of this study was to sort of look at what has it created in terms of perspective and challenges, and look at some of the main effects that has come on. And some of this may be more on a micro level as opposed to a macro level, but these are some of the things that is sort of that I was able to observe. Anyways, just to, obviously with this shutdown, unemployment, and many economies had to sort of rely more on technology as a result of that. And there was a little bit of selfishness that came out from some of the nations as a result of this COVID-19, because they were more looking at what's in there for them or for their population as opposed from a global perspective, especially at the beginning stage of this pandemic. And I would almost want to point out that India was one of those exceptions that they got a lot of kudos from around the world for sharing their vaccine, even though they were in short supply later down the line. So basically, this study, I kind of concluded that there's going to be a lot of changes coming up in a global sense, and some of that are going to be good, some of that is going to be bad. But I think the end result is yet to be seen as far as that's concerned. So again, as I said, this has definitely created a lot of opportunities, but more of a headache for many nations, especially countries that was truly dependent on a day-to-day basis, whether it was a daily wage earner or whether a nation that was dependent strictly on a lot on tourism. They had it tougher as opposed to some rich nations where they were able to provide for their population. So obviously, besides the transmission and the shutdown, it did affect a lot of different areas, and that's what I wanted to talk about. And I'm going to skip some of this very briefly. I'm going to keep some of this very briefly. So if you just see the slides, I am going to skip over some of this so that I don't spend too much time. On the literature review, I just want to share a couple of things. Some of the information in the literature review was very narrow in scope. For instance, Chalk in 2021 sort of looked at the different political attributes that responded well to fight against COVID-19, whereas others were very narrow in focus. For instance, Mile in 2020 looked at what was happening within Turkey. So there's a lot of those that went in. And yes, the second slide that you can see some of this very narrow micro in level, as opposed to there are even studies, whether you believe me or not, there's a bunch of studies just looking at securities and terrorism, and this, from all aspects of different authors from different parts of the world, which make it very interesting. Because if you think about COVID-19, you will think about some of these other business issues and health issues, but then there were other things that people spend a lot of time researching. So there's a lot of work. These are some of the samples I just picked up just to kind of give you. And then there are some studies that are strictly focused on China, because China obviously was blamed for the start of this pandemic, as well as how they have used the opportunity, if I want to use the word opportunity in a loose term, to sort of take advantage of the situation. So there's a lot of study that actually discusses China in detail. So let me share what was the main thrust of this paper. And this slide that I have, this is kind of what the paper is all about. And again, I'm going to keep it very simple in some of these slides, so please bear with me. COVID-19 had many ramifications with respect to globalization as well as the world order. You know, whether we are talking about manufacturing, trade, supply demand issues, and then later on in the problem, because of the built up of inventory or lack of inventory, supply chain issues. Similarly, there's a lot of discussion on security and safety. I'm not referring to just health issues, health security or safety, but more from a military perspective and so forth. Even in terms of communication protocol, there was a lot of discussion on that and what is the effect of that from a global perspective. How international relationships have changed over time, or some for better, some for worse, as well as what happened to, as a result of border closing and quarantine, lockdown, what it means to travel restriction, travel as well as the tourism industry. One of the biggest affected areas in a global sense is the hospitality as well as tourism. But then in some parts of the world, for instance, the UK, US, Australia, Canada, even the academic institutions and learning took a big hit because of revenues and so forth. And you know, they paid a lot of at least short-term price because of this pandemic. And then one of the biggest winners in this, and there's a lot of studies has done that looked at how technology just sort of took the front end of getting things done, as well as many of these technological advancement that really sort of helped us go through some of this, whether they were using 3D printers to make ventilators, or whether they are building houses. There's all sort of things that actually came out as a result of this pandemic, or at least it speed up the process in which changes were made. And then you cannot talk about the pandemic without talking about the survival of businesses, especially small and medium businesses, that many of them went under, and how some of them were able to quickly change their business practice to sort of take into account what's happening at the current moment. So that's another topic that I'm going to discuss briefly. And then finally, work-life balance and flexible work arrangement, how working from home just started because we were all forced to work from home or teach from home, or children going to school from home. But then how that has now changed the outlook of some of those issues from a global perspective. So these are some of the things that I want to discuss. And as I said, I want to keep it briefly. So please bear with me as I skip a lot of these slides for the purpose of keeping it short. So my very first point is the manufacturing, trade and demand, where, obviously, when you think about globalization, it is how it really refers to the interconnection between countries and how they have to work together to get things going. So globalization by itself as a definition became a challenge, because anybody who's involved in global trade, they are now forced to halt their normal way of doing business and trying to figure out new ways of doing that. But at the same time, then there were a lot of these political leaders or leadership that were more proactive, or they basically say it's my rules, my regulations, that it's better than yours, so I'm going to do it my way. And that created a lot of not only tension but also bitter relationship between many nations. and pointing fingers at the start of the pandemic or how it was all caused. It created a lot of problems, for instance, between the US and China and so forth. So, but unfortunately, these things created, from an international perspective, it created a lot of problems for countries because they were normally not able to do what they normally do. And then to top it off, many countries were looking inward because something that they would normally export, they are now restricting it for local use, and that put a lot of nations at a disadvantage. Imagine a country like Canada that is a developed nation that was suddenly without the pandemic, the necessary medication, because a lot of those were made overseas, especially in India, China, Philippines, and so forth. So they were all caught off guard, realizing that some of these crucial industries were left to or is done by foreign corporations, and they were now at their mercy of them. So that became a real problem. And obviously many of these problems, obviously because China has become the world's manufacturer, so many of these countries or companies were having a difficult time maintaining inventory, because things were not coming in. And then it started with back order. Next thing, because of lockdown, people are not working, ports were closed, and I'll talk about ports later. And then it created other supply chain issues globally. And, and we know that it had become a much bigger problem than initially anticipated. Just to give you another perspective, EU was initially struggling to keep its borders open and eventually closed it. But then many of these EU nations, people moved from one country to the next to work and so forth. And they were all now basically, because of lockdown, they couldn't do. And then because of closed borders, trade were difficult. And then some of the resources were limited. And they had to now go and trade with people that normally don't trade. And so EU, for instance, they had a lot of trade that they started doing with Russia, even though they are one of the adversary because of the pandemic. And some countries like Turkey, for instance, that actually had a deficit with the US because of the deterioration of relationship between China and US. They were able to they were producing some of the same products that the China was producing. They were able to improve their trade balance with the US because they were now supplying US with some of those same products that China used to previously produce. Another key item that I was discussing in this paper was the security and safety issues from a, besides the high challenges due to high unemployment rate, rising prices, as well as economic suffering, there were a lot of people that was extremely frustrated because of these new rules and regulations put in place. And some of these countries, especially very democratic countries like the US and many parts of the world, people were just not very happy. And they were showing this on the streets and causing damages simply because of these restrictions, and they were getting tired of these restrictions. So safety and security became a major issue for many countries. US was in the forefront. Many of you would have seen it in news TV channels and so forth. And to make things worse, there were other things like the Black Lives Matter movement and so forth that just almost added fuel to the fire. And then to finally top it off with the being an elections year, that was too many issues at the same time that was happening in the US, for instance. So so that was, again, I'm going to skip some of these items. And then there were even a lot of researchers that talked about how from a terrorist perspective, terrorist group, ISIS group. They talked about kinship terrorism and how that is, they because everybody is locked down, they can talk to a couple of family members and recruit them for their families. There was a lot of conversation going on, a lot of papers written on from that perspective. And I just wanted to point out a couple of these. So even though we don't think about security from a terrorist perspective in a time of pandemic, but there were a lot of concerns in many parts of the world because of that. So, and then the next point that I had in my article was pertaining to communications protocol. Remember, especially in the West, business protocol calls for shaking hands and verbal communication is very important. Suddenly all that was terminated, and now you are wearing a mask and you cannot handshake. And so some of those meetings that normally would be taking place where things were happening were not quite happening because of the pandemic. And even, if you ask me whether would I personally be more comfortable doing a face-to-face presentation and with a Q&A as opposed to an online presentation, obviously I would prefer face-to-face because of the interaction and so forth. Unfortunately, that is where we are today. So there's quite a bit of issues on that. And one of the things that I want to point out on this last point, I wanted to say, even though because this pandemic in many parts of the world was sort of politicized, and because of the communication was not clear, and this is pretty much a very classic case in the US, where the political parties, for instance, when this is before the Democratic Party who came into power, they basically were saying, this is Trump's vaccines, please do not take them. And so they were basically trying to score political points prior to the election. And so the messaging was not crystal clear. So both parties didn't ever come together and work towards coming to a solution, but they were basically attacking each other. And that was part of the problem that we are still paying a price as of today, because both parties were not quite on the same page on that. Okay, and another item that I wanted to briefly talk about is international relations. As I said, in the US, again, obviously, because of election, because of during 2020 with Trump's relationship with China, things were not, there were a lot of too many issues going on. And then him withdrawing from WTO, World Health Organization, and China jumping in, all of that sort of created a sort of a bad taste in many folks' mouth because of those bickering that was going on. And then again, because of the pandemic, some of those troops were removed from many parts of the world because they didn't want to put their troops, military troops in jeopardy. And some other nations had to sort of step in and do the part because countries like US and UK came out of Iraq and so forth. So international relation between some of these countries, when Turkey has to step in and do that with the US, were not rosy because they were not very happy that now they have to go and do the work when US, UK was and Australia was coming out. So, and then strictly from a global perspective, one of the things that COVID-19 revealed to many parts of the world, the many countries, were they were simply not ready for anything like this. That became very apparent after a couple of months into the pandemic. So, anyways, and then because the government was not ready or not quite prepared, the public's trust on the government sort of deteriorated very quickly because of that. And one other item that I have, which again, I'm going to make it a little brief because I notice my time is coming up. Because of the border crossing and the COVID lockdown, travel restrictions meant no foreign tourism, and many countries like Thailand and countries that depend on tourist dollars paid a very large price in terms of that. And also because of business travel, many multinational projects were sort of put in the back burner because they wanted to wait and see before they start injecting money into some of those businesses. So it is, again, it affected, whether it's some small countries or large countries, it affected many countries in many ways. I'm using Africa as an example here, where because of the COVID lockdown, gasoline demand was very low, which means they were not getting revenue from their gasoline sale because nobody was using as much gasoline as possible. So, now I will kind of skip some of this very quickly. Very briefly on academic learning, many countries, especially US, UK, Australia, they were suffering because many of the international students, whether it's wherever they are from, China, India, whatnot, they were not going there, which means not only they lost those foreign tuition fees, which is quite high, but they also lost some of those cheap labor in terms of research assistants and graduate assistants in their institutions. So that many of them, at least in the US, they were seeking the help of the government to compensate for the loss of foreign students. And I'll kind of skip some of this very briefly. And then, as I mentioned earlier, one other part is the technological advancements, whether it's video streaming, 3D printing devices, e-commerce, all of this just flourished and took another new level during this pandemic. And things that we thought we probably would not be able to do online was made possible thanks to pandemic. In the US, for instance, you cannot meet a doctor from a different state. If I'm in Texas, I cannot meet a doctor in California. But during pandemic, they made exceptions like that where I can meet other doctors from other states and so forth. So there were a lot of things done because of the pandemic. And some of these things were kind of been left alone, at least for now. Obviously, we all know whether it's Zoom, Google Meet, and so forth are all being used extensively thanks to the pandemic. And I have a bunch of examples, and I will skip whether it's Netflix or whether it's Amazon. Some of these countries have done extremely well. Their revenue has basically broke previous records because of the pandemic. And then, as I mentioned, two other important items, business practices. Many businesses, whether it's grocery chain and so forth, all over the world, they have changed the way they do business. In the US, whether they deliver groceries get delivered or curb pickup, and then in terms of food services, whether it's DoorDash or GrabHub, all of that have changed the way we do things. And some of these things are here to stay because people just recognize, wait a minute, I have friends who have made up their mind they're never going to step into a grocery store because they say, why should I when I can just order them and they're going to deliver it to me? So that is how this pandemic have changed some of these things, and they are there to stay. And finally, I do want to mention my last point here is work-life balance. How initially we started or we were forced to stay at home. Today, many of those employees, and many of them actually took a 10 to 30% pay cut. I know even IT employees in India have taken a 30% pay cut because they were forced to work from home. And the the company basically said, you're going to take a 30% pay cut and work from home. So they didn't have a choice. And and in the US, the same thing has happened. And in some cases, that reduction in paycheck was a pain for some workers. For others, now they are looking at that and saying, well, I don't have to commute. I don't have to put petrol in my car. I will take the pay cut now because I can also do other things while working. So many of this new generation now looking at work-life balance in a completely different lens thanks to the pandemic. So that I think that is something that is going to stay, and I don't think some of the older generation will look at that or appreciate that as much as some of the younger generation, because they seem to now wanting to balance work and life more than the previous generations. And then my final point really, that was my last point as far as those effects of COVID-19 on globalization. And in summary, I just want to point out one thing. There's more uncertainty about globalization than what is going to happen. I know it's going to change. At least I know that it is going to be different. How different, I don't know. It also depends how countries go back to the way they were doing things. I think some of the things are never going to go back. I think in some cases the trusts were broken. Some people look at some countries sort of, they don't have the kind of trust they had before. Because when some of your crucial goods and services are not delivered or deliberately stopped, now they are thinking, should we do this, continue doing this post-pandemic? So some of this will come into, I would say, to the forefront, at least in the short run. So again, mine is a global scale, and I do believe globalization will not be the same that we know of 3 years ago. It is going to be slightly different, and I think the end of the day, we are yet to see exactly how it's going to shape in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Bala, for a very informative and useful lectures. You have put a lot of efforts, but you make us a great disappointment by not visiting India, our department last time. So we are very eager to see you in our department after some time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. What are thanks?
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Showing gratitude is one of the simplest yet most powerful things human can do for each other. Of course, again to propose vote of thanks. Greetings to one and all. I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this memorable occasion. Let me first of all start by giving glory to the Almighty God for making today's occasion a resounding success. First and foremost, I would like to thank our head of the department, Dr.M.Selvam. Dr.M.Selvam for arranging this special event. Thank you, sir. And next, my heartfelt thanks to our chief guest of this event, Dr. Balasubramaniam, Professor Sam Houston State University, USA, who virtually gave a lecture on the effects of COVID-19 on globalization. We learned various dimensions of topic in the present day context. The sessions are informative and useful. We record our sincere appreciation to Dr. Balasubramaniam, sir. Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to thank Dr. S.I.M. Pillai for sparing your precious time with us. Thank you, sir. The participants' involvement, interaction, and participation added to this webinar. We thank all the participants for their support. Next, I owe my special gratitude to my department faculty members, PhD scholars, and my seniors, my classmates for your cooperation in making this session a grand success. Once again, I extend my hearty thanks to all of you.
Thank you. For the session.
Welcome back to this next session of the 17th International Seminar on Dynamics of Emerging Business Innovation and Trends, Academia Industry Role, Debit Air 2022. To improve is to change, to be perfect is to be changed often. Now, we require Sarani of 2nd MBA to welcome the special guest of this meeting.
Geeta, madam? Madam Geeta? Mike, please unmute your mic.
Yes, hi. Hi, good afternoon.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Wait. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I feel extremely delighted to welcome you all for this session. You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to become great. First, let me start with welcoming our head of the department, Dr.M.Selvam, and Professor S. Ayyavilai, former senior professor of economics, Bharat University. A warm welcome to you both, sir. Next, with much immense pleasure, I would like to welcome our chief guest, Professor Geeta Subramaniam, Professor, Graduate School of Business, Segi University, Malaysia. She is going to deliver a lecture on aging gracefully in the digital age in Malaysia. It's an interesting topic and the need of the hour. We are very eager to listen to you, ma'am. Hearty welcome to you, ma'am. Teaching is the only profession that creates all other professions. I am happy to welcome our department faculty members, PhD scholars, and MBA students. Thank you.
Yes, over to Professor Geeta.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Prof. Selvam. Thank you, scholar. Good afternoon, everyone. And Prof. Selvam, thank you very much for inviting me to this prestigious hybrid conference. I'm so happy again to be here to this conference. And of course, like what Prof. Bala says, I really miss Trichy and looking forward for this whole pandemic to end. Okay, so
always.
okay, thank you, Prof. Selvam. And scholars and academics, hi, how are you? Nice to see all of you. Wishing all of you happy Pongal.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so I am going to share with you something which I have done with regards to aging, an issue which is very critical in Malaysia and many parts of the world, but it's very critical and it has become more critical post-COVID-19. So I know that we are running late, so I won't be sharing all the slides, but I'll be sharing some thoughts on aging post-COVID-19. Okay, so as Prof. Bala, hi Prof. Bala from US, how are you? So as Prof. Bala and Prof. Shankar also has spoken earlier, they spoke from the macroeconomic viewpoint. I'm looking at post-COVID and COVID-19 at a very micro level, and specifically on aging gracefully, aging in place, and post-COVID. So as a background, COVID-19, yeah, we have heard from since yesterday, many speakers talked about it, and today also. It has devastated the whole world and took us all for a ride. And we hope that ride will stop soon. But at the same time, we all have to accept and admit that it has accelerated IR 4.0, especially in countries like Malaysia, in all sectors and in all ways. It has managed to change the mindset of everyone, immaterial of age, gender, social status. So I guess the only way we can leverage on it is by rethinking the supply chain and moving on. Looking at 4 concepts which I would like to highlight before I go to what I did in my research. Aging and COVID-19. So as I said just now, COVID-19 has affected everybody immaterial of age, and it looks like it has affected the elderly more than the others. So Malaysia, being a multi-ethnic country, also noted the challenges that the elderly went through this period, the last 2 years. And we found that especially the elderly in the rural areas and the low-income areas were more affected than those in the city. So what is this thing we are calling, or what is this concept we are calling as aging? We are going towards an aging nation. I mean here is my country, Malaysia. And why do we say that? Because according to United Nations, if you reach 15%, you are considered an old country. And we are currently at 10%. And within the next 8 years, we are expected to reach 15%. So we are slowly moving there, but it's moving faster than we expected. So many countries define elderly and older persons differently, but we are taking United Nations definition, where if you are above 60, you are considered an older person. Okay. So what is this concept called aging gracefully? So aging gracefully is you go through the phase of life, the cycle of life, and you continue doing what you used to do, maybe slower but surely. So this is aging gracefully. And a new concept which is global but which is currently becoming very common in Malaysia is something called aging in place. Aging in place simply means you are able to live where you want to live happily and independently and comfortably. So those days, many of the Asian culture is where the parents take care of the children and the children take care of the parents. But this trend is slowly changing. And many cases where children end up sending their parents to aged homes. So what is happening in our country is that many people are saying, no, we don't want to go to old folks' home or aged homes. We want to stay where we are staying and we want to age in place. So that is aging in place. Many studies have been done in Malaysia to show that more than 80% of the above 60 actually want to stay in their own home and age there with their community. Okay, so I will just skip what is not so crucial. So coming to the fourth concept in my title, digital age. So just like many other countries, Malaysia has been very, very committed to the digital economy journey. And there's a roadmap here. I'm just going to skip that. And a lot of incentives are given for this digital age. Okay, so as we move on, aging population, digital economy, digitalization. So even the elderly are becoming very tech savvy. We notice that if you look around you, your dad, your mom, your uncle, your auntie, who is 60 years and above, all of them know how to use, at least they know how to use WhatsApp. Okay, so that is already called low tech savvy. They still are considered tech savvy, but low. So in the same case in Malaysia, a lot of tech has been used in the last 2 years. An increase in telemedicine, an increase in geriatric unit at our main hospital in Kuala Lumpur, in the city of Malaysia, capital city of Malaysia. And a lot of sharing economy has been used, as we heard from the other two speakers earlier, the other two invited speakers. A lot of food panda, a lot of grab food, groceries being done online, everywhere. This is the name of the game. So how does my title come into this whole story of pandemic, COVID-19 and Wi-Fi and internet? So we found two issues. Okay, so the two issues is, number one, we are going towards an old country soon, within the next 8 years. So what is the consequence of this? The consequence is, as we grow older, the demographic profile of the country changes. You need more helpful housing and increased health care. So that is one. The demographic phenomenon has caused a consequence which the nation has to look into and not ignore anymore. But more importantly, I would like to say the second one. During COVID-19, we found that many of the elderly were affected. Okay, it's not just in Malaysia, I'm sure. It's everywhere. Okay, it's everywhere in the world. But my study is only looking at Malaysia. We found that many of the elderly were affected psychologically and mentally. Okay, sorry, I didn't do the slideshow. That would be better. Okay, so many of the elderly were affected psychologically, mentally, financially, and physically. So that prompted me to do this study. A lot of issues here. Okay, so what is the objective? I have 3 objectives in this research. Okay, you are growing old, but do you know how to use internet? Was my first question. Second question I wanted to examine was, if there is internet, what is the acceptance level? And the third objective of the research was, what are the possible strategies as a way forward for the elderly to age gracefully, age in place in the digital age? So the methodology, I did a mixed method, a quantitative and a qualitative study. Quantitative, I had given respondents, 400 respondents, a questionnaire. For the qualitative study, I did interview for 30 elderly people. So imagine I did interview during COVID-19 using the Zoom platform. Even that itself shows you how tech savvy they are. So I use the theory of acceptance. I'm going to skip all this, demographic factors, mobile apps, and I'm going to go straight into my findings. So using the TEM framework, we found that majority of the respondents out of the 400, actually more than 75% of them use the internet frequently and spend a lot of time on the internet. The next thing we wanted to find out is, what are the basic needs of the aging population in relation to pre-COVID-19 and post-COVID-19. We found that generally it was 1, 2, 3, 4. But during COVID-19, number 3, mental health, was a bigger issue than financial security. It was quite interesting to note that. Okay, the demographic factors, all demographic factors were found to have a relationship, a significant relationship with the use of internet. Okay, I'll skip all this. Okay, this was interesting. The study found that if the elderly found that perceived usefulness, the usefulness of the internet was there. They were willing to learn how to use the internet and the technology and move forward. So this is important findings, because this means that we can all start teaching our brothers, sisters, parents, uncles, aunties. Come on, use Wi-Fi, use internet, and use WhatsApp so that you can move forward in this digital age. Okay, so what are the services these elderly were looking for? Most of them said they were using the web, www, or the Wi-Fi, or the internet. It was interesting. They were using it to get information. Majority used it for family communication, just to communicate with their parents, their children, their employers. But we also found it very interesting when we asked them, what would you like to use the internet next time? And we found that they actually said things like, if given a choice, I would like to order groceries through the handphone. So this is, we are talking about 60 and above, not the younger age group. They literally said they would like to order food using the handphone. So that was interesting in our study. Okay, so I'm going to come to our conclusion of the study. So 3 main findings I would like to share with all of you here. 3 main findings. We found that firstly, using the TAM model, if the elderly found that using internet and using technology is useful, they wanted to learn how to use it and continue using internet. That means continue using technology. Secondly, we asked them, what did they use the handphone and mobile for? Majority of them, more than 90% of them, said communication with family. But it was surprising that there was another 50% who actually said they used it a lot to order groceries. Okay, so this is during COVID time. Okay, and when we asked them what would they like to do if given a chance for the future, we were very surprised that actually they all said that, not all, majority of them said that they would like to have a part-time caregiver or somebody who would come to their house and give some cleaning services, washing services, ironing, etc. But they wanted to use the mobile to book them. It's like a Grab service. And there were a few who said that sometimes they want to go for a walk and none of their children have time for them. They would like to have somebody who would like to come and just take them for a walk in the evening, a travel buddy. So those were the two main findings from the quantitative research. It was interesting that the qualitative research which we did on the 30 elderly people during COVID-19, we based our questions on 6 dimensions of aging gracefully: well-being in terms of mental and emotional, social, financial, physical, digital, and spiritual. And I'm sure all of us, this findings is not unexpected. It is expected, but it is sad because the one which they ranked most, they really felt taken aback and they were just not prepared for it, is they were very mentally and emotionally drained during COVID-19 because they were not prepared when the children couldn't come and visit them. Because I must explain here that during lockdown, there was total lockdowns in Malaysia for 2 weeks, which extended to 4 weeks, which extended to 6 weeks, which eventually extended to 2 months. So 2 months, nobody can visit anybody. You just imagine how the elderly would have felt. They couldn't see their grandchildren, they couldn't see their children. And then they started going into Zoom and they learned how to use the Zoom and they felt better. But in spite of that, it is sad to note that 42% of the elderly couldn't manage it. So what happened is behavioral issues emerged, like increased tobacco and alcohol consumption, aggressive behavior, and the most sad part was their depression. Many of them went through severe depression and psychological distress. So I come to the last part of my presentation. So what? So what are we trying to recommend here? So some thoughts moving forward. Although the Malaysian government has wider policy measures for the elderly, a few policy measures looks like needs immediate attention. The main one being a better connectivity for the well-being of the elderly. Okay. So during the COVID-19, many non-governmental organizations reached out to the elderly. Many good Samaritans were very ready to go and help, sit down and talk to them. And it really helped them mentally. Okay. But this needs to be more organized and structured, because as we move forward with Omicron and other new variants, we still have so much of SOP to follow. Social distancing and masking all the time, and no social gathering, no going to temple more than a certain number of people, etc. No social wedding, no social gathering. So that means still a heavy depression for the elderly. Okay, we need more affordable retirement homes. But my study was trying to look at this. It'll be good if we have a mobile apps, because we are looking at the digital age and the elderly. And we found that more than 80% of them use WhatsApp and use handphones. So why not? Why not we get them an apps which is elderly friendly? So we came up with a prototype called the Golden Care Apps, called the Buddy and the Needy. This is only a prototype. It hasn't been implemented in the country, but I tried this out with university students, where the students need a job, not to say job like a 3D job, but just maybe a caregiver for the elderly, maybe go and buy groceries for them. Okay, these models are used very, very widely in the Western world, but it's not at all used in countries like Malaysia. Okay, so that was one of it. The buddy helps the needy. Okay, so of course there are some limitations to the study. I'm not going to talk about that, but I would like to highlight that this is part of SDG, healthy aging, and focusing on technology. So mental health of future aging population, yeah, we have to look into this. And why is this topic not only important to aging people like me, but also to all the young scholars who are seated here? Remember, you all have someone at home who are going to be in this group, or they are already in this group. So you need to give some importance to them. So what next? So we have heard a lot about COVID. So I think the only thing we can do and move forward, like I said, I want to go to Trichy to see Prof. Selvam, but I can't sit and cry about it. I have to look at it and say, yes, I'm going to do it. So let's embrace everything that happens with a positive attitude and energy. And going to my last slide, something for everybody to ponder here, not just me and my researchers, but all the academics and also the scholars. We have to note that aging gracefully is not an overnight matter. It is important. We have to be wary of it right from the beginning, at least 10 years prior to retirement. Some of us were very, very prepared for retirement, but when it happens, we are still there. But some people were not prepared. Okay, so I end my session with the line in red color. It's not important to add years to your life, but I think it's more important to add life to your years. So with that, I end my sharing. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Dr. Geeta Subramaniam. I am Ayam Pillai from retired person. I really enjoyed your talk. We said that women have broader heart with full of love, and men have bigger brains with full of intelligence.
Oops.
And because of this bigger heart, you could touch the basic problem of the present society, namely aging, your basic concern. Ultimately, all our development efforts should aim at well-being. And you have touched a very important topic, and we all really enjoyed. We came to know about the situation in Malaysia. It was very good, madam. We enjoyed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
Showing
you.
gratitude is one of the simplest yet most powerful things human can do for each other. Now we invite yes, now Abhinayani of second MBA to propose for thanks. A great honor to propose vote of thanks on the scoop plenary session. First and foremost, I would like to thank the chief guest of the session, Dr. Geeta Subramaniam, who is a professor in Graduate School of Business, Sydney University, Malaysia, who gave virtually a lecture on the topic of aging gracefully in digital age in Malaysia. The lecture is very interesting. Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable lecture. I extend my heartfelt thanks to my head of the department, Dr.M.Selvam sir, Professor Ayapalai sir, department faculty members, my fellow mates, my juniors, and PhD scholars for making this event a resounding success. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Geeta and others, for the wonderful speech. So my personal thanks to Bala also, then Isaiah, so all the three has engaged this session very usefully, very informative. Thank you, madam.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof.
Okay,
See you soon in Trichy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Selvam.
Thank you, Bala sir. Thank you. Isaiah, thank you, Isaiah. Thank you.
An important announcement: the participants are requested to fill the feedback form The link for feedback is posted in the chat box. Certificate will be issued only if you submit the feedback and present the paper. The participants are requested to log into the respective panel paper presentation session as informed through May at exactly 1:45 p.m. Login details and unique ID for the paper are also available in the university website. Once again, I repeat it. The participants are requested to fill the feedback form. The link feedback is posted in the chat box. Certificate will be issued only if you submit the feedback and present the paper. Let's break for lunch. We can meet at 1:45 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all.